Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Aspen Academy session. Today, I am joined by Sierra Chastain-Rittue of CW Mars, and she is going to be sharing about navigating Aspen and Evergreen with confidence. As always, this session is recorded, so we will send it out at the end, and feel free to share with all of your colleagues. So without further ado, Sierra, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Elise. I'm going to share my screen with you guys and we can get started. All right. So welcome to our Aspen Academy, Navigating Aspen and Evergreen with Confidence. As Elise said, I'm Sierra Chastain-Rittue. I work at CW Mars and I am our web support specialist, which is basically our fancy name for Aspen person. A little bit about CW Mars. CW Mars stands for Central and Western Massachusetts Resource Sharing. We are a multi-type library consortium of it's 167 libraries now, actually. We have multiple types of libraries, so public, both rural and city libraries. We have academic libraries, school libraries, and special libraries as members of our consortium. We have been using the Evergreen ILS since 2012, and we just recently upgraded to version 3.15.4 in October of this past year. We've also been using Aspen Discovery since March of 2024. So just running through the agenda, kind of laying out what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start off just with some terminology differences. We'll talk a little bit about some Evergreen specific ILS setup in Aspen, and then we'll kind of walk through some different administration topics, the catalog, and some patron facing elements. And then we will tie it all up with some common challenges and community resources. All right. So terminology differences. I want to add the caveat here of there are more terminology differences between Evergreen and Aspen, but this is, I think, the main ones that you'll probably encounter or notice day to day when supporting your libraries, when working with a support vendor. So first and foremost, the bib ID or the record, or sorry, the bib ID or the TCN is the record in Aspen. In Evergreen, we call them parts. That's going to be the volume in Aspen. I think parts and volumes is the one that I get tripped up with the most, especially if I'm talking with a support vendor. I usually do parts slash volumes because I refer to it as parts, especially when I'm talking to my coworkers and to my libraries. But if I'm talking about Aspen stuff, it's volumes. And then the last one is profile slash permission group, and that's going to be the same as your P type or patron type in Aspen. All right, so as far as ILS setup goes, first and foremost, Evergreen, as of right now, December 25, does not have API integration with Aspen. We send files to Aspen via scheduled exports on the Evergreen side through SFTP, and then we use an API. So the ILS indexer, when you're using Evergreen, runs every 5 minutes by default. That can be adjusted. I think when we first went live, we did 10 minutes, but our libraries had issues with how long the statuses and things were taking to update. So we dropped it down to 5 minutes, and we've had more success with that. And we with this indexer, so it's running every 5 minutes by default, but you can still use Force Index to manually update those records, and that's going to be under staff view. So we have staff view set up on all of our records to just display automatically. It's a closed panel, but because of that, I or any other network staff who need to can force reindex records as needed. Generally, the record updates will take between 10 to 15 minutes through this process. Since it is through file transfer versus a API connection, it will take a little longer. It will, I don't know if this is a caveat for us just due to our size, but it can take longer than that, depending on, at least for us, the time of day. So usually we see some slowdowns 2 to 4 o'clock, right? That like after school, post work pickup time where everyone's going to the library. That will usually see it take a little longer, at most 30 minutes, but we're also processing like 30,000 records within 30 minutes. So it's not like we're just having a few changes that need to be processed. We're going through a lot of data. So, again, big caveat with this slide here. First and foremost, please don't touch any of this without talking to your support vendor. Pretty please. These are Evergreen specific settings, but these Evergreen specific settings will also vary a little bit depending on how your server is set up. So you don't want to make any changes in this unless you are talking with your support vendor. This is something they should that you will probably set up during implementation and not really need to mess with much after that. But these are Evergreen specific settings. And this is going to be located in the ILX indexing profile within Aspen. Evergreen settings is one of those panels. So the main settings here. First, we have org unit schema. So that's going to tell Aspen how to understand your org unit setup, right? So for CW Mars, we're a consortium. We're using what is shown in the screenshot here, where we have the level 0 overall CW Mars instance. And I'll talk a little bit more about org unit on another slide. But this is how Aspen is going to know where to put your new libraries, basically, if you're adding any libraries. These next three settings, the number of retries for failed bib lookups, the number of milliseconds to pause after bib lookups, and number of extraction threads all relate to how the ILS indexer is processing those records or those exports from Evergreen. And that is one of those particularly that you'll want to talk with your support vendor before making any adjustments. If you come to the Aspen for Evergreen group, we do talk about this occasionally, and I can tell you that I think almost every Aspen Evergreen library has a different setup in here. So you might need to tweak some of these settings to find what works best for your instance, but you can change these. All right, so now we're going to talk about some patron types and ways that you can use patron types in Aspen, or at least ways that we use patron types in Aspen. So we do use the patron types in Aspen to automatically assign roles based on the user profile group. So we, for example, all of our libraries have one account that we call the library administrator account, and that is the account that has all the permissions to manage their library's catalog. That we have a special profile group that we created called Aspen Administrator in Evergreen. And so we set it up in Aspen so that the Aspen Administrator profile group will automatically assign the library administrator permission roles. So when we create an account in Evergreen, we don't have to worry about going into Aspen and adding those permissions because the profile group determines what permissions are going to be added. Similarly, we do have a general library staff standard permission that we have for all of our staff accounts, and that just gives folks access basically to lists and to Masquerade. So that is something that we have set up. Again, any staff profile group we have set to treat as staff, and that's going to enable access to the staff settings section within your account, and that will also allow staff to turn off the automatic logout based on IP. We do have our libraries that have IPs with us that are set up in Aspen. We do have those set up to be treated as an OPAC so that they refresh every 10 minutes of inactivity. If you are working at your library, though, and you're using that same IP address as your OPAC, that can get really frustrating if you're working on something and then get logged out, right? So that is what we'll use that setting for. And then we also don't allow all of our patrons to renew online. We only allow certain patron types to renew online. And Aspen has a setting for that where you can say this patron type is allowed to renew online, in which case they'll see the renew your library card button when their card is expired, and they can actually go through that process and renew their card using our online e-forms. Now, some more administration stuff. This is going to be a mix of screenshots from Evergreen and from Aspen for these slides. So I tried to point them out when I added them, but I'll also say that as well. So when you are configuring a new library or a location in Aspen, first you want to create it in Evergreen. Always start in Evergreen when you're creating your new library or your new branch location. And as I said before, your org unit schema setting in that Evergreen settings panel in the ILS indexing profile will determine how Aspen interprets all this data. So you want to make sure that that is set up to match your org unit schema. So I took a snapshot of the CW Mars org unit here from Evergreen, and you can see here we have the level 0, all of the CW Mars libraries. We have this level 1, which we don't really use. It's kind of the areas. It's you can kind of ignore that really, but the level 2 is going to be that library, and then level 3 is the branch. I guess you can think of it like that. The thing to note is that all the libraries are going to have a branch, even if it's a single branch library, right? So this Chester library is a small public library in a little rural town. They have this Chester MA org unit, but then we also have the Chester Hamilton Memorial Library for that actual location. When we set this up in Evergreen, that gets sent over to Aspen. So here's what it looks like in Evergreen. Here's what it looks like in Aspen. So this is that same library, Chester, in library systems. You can see that we have the subdomain here. We did add the base URL because this is already set up. And then the display name here is really what, the library is called. I will say too that we add our town names to all of our library names. So you might see that like Chester Hamilton Memorial Library. That's just part of honestly, I think it's more for network staff because it helps me figure out where all of our libraries are, right? We have some libraries where they're all like, they share the same initial. So you'll have a bunch of HPLs, SPLs, BMLs, things like that. And that can make it really hard to figure out which library is which. But so Aspen will pull this in from Evergreen. And then I also wanted to show the locations here. I took a little bit of a bigger screenshot because I wanted to show some of our branches that don't have a subdomain set up. The way that we set up our catalog, and obviously this is, up for discussion with all of you folks while you implement, but we have one catalog per library. Even if it's a branch system, all their branches use that one library catalog. So for these top two locations here, these are two Chicopee branches that aren't their main library location. We have the Fairview branch and then we have their Bookmobile branch. So because those aren't the main library, we didn't give them a subdomain. They're just on that main library catalog, if that makes sense. So if you want to give all your libraries branches a catalog, you can, but we don't do that. And so we do have to sometimes make edits, maybe remove a subdomain or something like that, depending on what's been pulled into Aspen. All right. So moving out of administration, we're going to talk about the catalog and what some of those records might look like. So one big thing, and I think this, I mean, I've hope this has come up with other people. I feel like I'm remembering that. But one big thing that we end up talking a lot to our libraries about is the on order item status. So generally, when you're thinking about Evergreen, our libraries, if they have an item that is in on order status, that usually means that they're using the Evergreen acquisitions module to purchase and manage their collection development stuff. Not all of our libraries use acquisitions. Some of our libraries just, add items to records that are already there. They don't do anything else with that. Because of that, and on order being limited to just acquisitions libraries in Evergreen, we have had a number of our libraries be confused when they see on order titles in Aspen. We did set up, because Aspen is for the patrons, we set up in the status mapping within your indexing profile that all on order titles in Aspen are actually the following evergreen statuses. So it's on order, which is what all of our acquisitions libraries use, but then it's also in process and received, which is what a lot of those other libraries use if they're not using acquisitions. As far as the patron is concerned, on order just means it's coming. It's not here yet, but it's on the way. So that's why we decided to include those other statuses, because even if you're not an acquisitions library, you still have titles that are on the way. And even if it's not on order, that's essentially what it is. So that is something to know, especially if you do use acquisitions with your Evergreen instance. You'll want to think about that language that you're using and making sure you clarify to your libraries that the statuses in Evergreen might be different from the statuses in Aspen. Next is the added in the last filter. I use this a lot if I'm trying to help my libraries make like a new titles, browse category, or something like that. We have had some libraries get confused because they're wondering where that added in the last date is coming from. So, because again, we're doing everything through exports, the added in the last date that Aspen is looking at is coming from this specific file, barcode active dates CSV. So that means nothing to me, I will say. That's something I ask our developer about who works on Evergreen stuff. But that is the spreadsheet or document that Aspen is going to look at when determining an item's added in the last date. So if you're ever having issues or libraries reaching out saying, hey, this title isn't showing up as new when it is new, almost always it's something like that where I've seen libraries like reuse a barcode for an old title. They just replaced the copy and they're calling it new. But because that's a reused barcode and it's not actually a new barcode that is newly active, Aspen doesn't consider it new. So that is something to keep in mind. And if you do have any issues with titles showing up in added in the last or missing from added in the last, you'll definitely want to take a look at that file in particular to see what Evergreen is sending over to Aspen. Moving on, copy notes and item tags. I don't know if I'm going to offend anyone saying this. I feel like they're very similar. Um, I did not really use item tags myself working in the library, and I think the libraries we do have using them are very small. I think most libraries using Evergreen are going to use copy notes for stuff. Either way, copy notes and item tags will show up in the note section of that copies panel. The one thing to note if you are using item tags is that URLs are stripped when they are sent from Evergreen to Aspen. So if, for example, with a museum pass, some libraries would add an item tag and they would include the URL to either the museum or maybe a booking system. And then because we're stripping those URLs, when it's in Aspen, that info isn't there. So if you do add the URLs to copy notes instead of item tags, they do show up. They're not stripped from Aspen. But that is something to note is that in item tags specifically, the URLs do get stripped when Evergreen is putting together the files to export. So you can see in this note section here, I just took a screenshot from one of our museum pass records. But you can see here we have public note, colon, and then the actual note that the library put in. There's a few different kinds of notes that can be put in here. I think there's one like hold note. Of course, I've never thought of any other things now that I'm trying to do this right now, but it will include whatever that title is for the copy note. So it will include the title and the body of those copy notes as long as, they're in your export. All right. Now on to our patron-facing stuff. The preferred pickup location I wanted to specifically call out because this is a little different. The preferred pickup location, Aspen will load a patron's preferred pickup location only the first time that they sign in. When Aspen or when a patron signs into Aspen for the first time, Aspen's going to talk to Evergreen and pull in their preferred pickup location. Now, Aspen also allows for alternate pickup locations to be selected, which Evergreen does not support. So we do encourage patrons and staff to manage those pickup locations in Aspen instead of in Evergreen. For staff, I think this is more of a adjustment just because staff need to then masquerade in Aspen to help patrons do that versus before where they would just open the patron record in Evergreen and update their pickup location. Since we're talking about preferred stuff, we're going to talk about preferred names. These screenshots are from the patron record in Evergreen. One thing to note is that any preferred names in the patron account will be displayed in Aspen if you have that setting set up. That is, I think, in ILS indexing. It might be in library systems. But we do have that set up so that all of the preferred names are shown if they are entered in Evergreen. So I have my test patron, Margaret, and her preferred name is Peggy. When she signs in to Aspen, you can see that it says Peggy last initial because that's the settings we have. And then in her contact information, we see both the full primary name is what that's called in Evergreen, and then the preferred name as well. So what Evergreen is doing is just or sorry, what Aspen's doing is basically replacing those preferred name fields, right? So since we only put in a preferred first name, Aspen didn't delete any of the others. We still have her last name. And we're looking at the screenshot again. Contact information. This is just a small thing, but different Evergreen instances can have different contact information fields just depending on your setup. And so, depending on your contact information choices in Evergreen, that might look a little different in Aspen, just depending on what you're sending over. All right, checked out titles. One thing to note is that you can show item barcodes in checked out titles. That was something that our patrons really wanted. It was in the Evergreen OPAC. It's just helpful, especially if you have a lot of the same title or you have things that you're looking for and you're trying to make sure you can return it on time, right? So here's a screenshot from titles checked out, and you can see that we have the author, the call number, the format, and then underneath that is the barcode for the item that is checked out. And that is a setting that you can toggle on or off. So again, we had patrons who liked seeing the barcode, so we turned that on when we moved to Aspen. Something else that patrons can do is they can import lists from the old catalog. This was really important for us because we were moving from the Evergreen OPAC to the Aspen Discovery layer. So we had a bunch of patrons who had tons and tons of lists in the Evergreen catalog, and that's really upsetting if you have to, redo all of that work. So import from old catalog is something that we had turned on. Again, this is a feature that you don't have to include, but you can turn that on. And then if patrons click import from old catalog, Aspen will go and check Evergreen for lists and pull those in. All right, some patron-facing just notes about the hold screen. This, I will say, is specific to us because of the integration that we're using. This might be similar if you're using a different third-party integration, but we do text notifications through MessageBee by Unique. And so patrons can set their hold notifications on the place hold screen. There is a caveat with this, at least with our text notifications, in that patrons can't change the phone number for text notifications per hold. They can say, yes, I want text notifications, but they can't say, yes, I want text message and put in a different number. MessageBee is going to look at the phone number that is in the phone number field in hold notification preferences. So make sure that patrons have that set. Otherwise, they might not get their hold notifications. All right. Non-holdable items. So Aspen looks at the un-API parts of the Evergreen export to determine if an item is unholdable. There's a few different fields that it looks at. So the copy itself will have a holdable attribute in un-API. That is set to true or false. If it's set to false, then it should be set to unholdable. But Aspen will, when it's reading all of that data, look for this unholdable subfield. And if it sees that, and that's in addition to if it's in an unholdable location or any of those other layers of holdability. If it says unholdable, Aspen will show it as not holdable. So again, we have that screenshot of our museum pass record. Different libraries have different policies. Some let you place holds on it, some don't. So you can see we have not holdable, ask your library for these statuses, and then we have available, not holdable, just some variety. And that is something that can be set per copy. All right, this is always a fun topic. Meta record holds. So meta record holds can't be placed by the patron in Aspen, but staff can still place meta record holds for patrons in Evergreen and the staff client. Just quick overview, meta record holds are really if I, as a patron, am asking for a book, and I really don't care what format. I want it either book, large print, audiobook. I just want whatever comes in first. Then we can place holds that will be filled by the first available item matching that. So in this example, I placed a hold or a meta record hold for The Martian, and I put book, large print, audiobook, DVD. I put like all the possible formats that this came out in. So this is what it looks like in Evergreen. We can see that it's a meta record hold by that M hold type. When we look in Aspen, Aspen is going to show the title, potentially the author. It didn't in this case because it pulled in the movie, but it will show the title and sometimes the author and a cover image from one of those matching records. It won't look totally correct when it's in pending holds, but once that item is checked out to the patron, it will update to reflect whatever item it is that they got. So right now we see the DVD for The Martian is what's showing, but if the patron actually gets the large print and that's what's checked out for their account, once it gets checked out, it will update and show the correct information. All right. Just some common challenges that we encounter a lot when helping our libraries. The first thing, and this comes up every year, the library hours and closed dates need to be manually updated in Aspen as well as in Evergreen. So Aspen and Evergreen don't talk to each other as far as the library hours and the closed dates go. So we do have to do that in both places if libraries want it updated in both places. This is something that generally network staff is doing for our libraries, but some of our libraries do feel comfortable enough to do this on their own in Aspen, but that is something that comes up all the time. The next thing is password reset messages. So having the password reset message that is sent by Evergreen actually link patrons to the Aspen password reset form just requires some updates to some Evergreen templates. It doesn't require Aspen development, just some work edits to your templates in Evergreen. But once you do that, patrons can reset their passwords and do everything in Aspen. So Jason Boyer from Equinox put together some instructions for this. I linked it in here, and it's I'm gonna say very easy because our Evergreen person did it in like 5, 10 minutes. So we're assuming that that's easy. And then the last thing that we struggle with a lot, and this is, I think, because we moved from the Evergreen OPAC to Aspen, but in the Evergreen OPAC, patrons were able to suspend or freeze a hold, depending on what lingo you use, when they were placing the hold. So they could request the new Kristen Hanna book and then say, I don't actually want that for 6 months. In Aspen, they need to place the hold and then navigate to titles on hold to suspend it. So there's a few extra clicks. That's been a little bit of a pain point since we went to Aspen, but it's not not that crazy, honestly. I feel nervous saying this. It's quieted down since we've been live on Aspen. Of course, now that I've said this, everyone's gonna come up with all these issues. But those are the main things. And then just some community resources, plugging the Aspen for Evergreen users group meeting. We meet bi-monthly. There is a link to the agenda, and then all of our meetings are also recorded and posted on the Evergreen Community YouTube channel. So if you want to take a look at those, feel free to check out past meetings. We have the hashtag Evergreen Slack channel. And then there is a JIRA filter for any issues that are impacting the Evergreen ILS. So if you are curious if something is specific to Evergreen, you can view that filter in JIRA and see what's going on. And then here you go. I put up my contact information, my name, my email, and then links to both the consortial catalog and then our Select a Library page in case you want to check out some of our individual library catalogs. And that's it.